hopefully we have now all managed to get to watch the Rings of Power, because there will be a couple of spoilers in this. I'd like to just briefly say who you are and where you fit in your expertise on Tolkien.
Hi, I'm Paula Kalamaras. I also write under the name of PM Amaris. I'm an author, publisher, writer, Tolkien fanatic. And I began my quest with Tolkien when I was very young. I moved from Narnia into Middle Earth, as I said earlier. I teach a class for Case Western Reserve University on Tolkien, and we'll be doing a Narnia class, I hope, in the spring. But right now, my whole Tolkien class has been very involved in the first two books, and we're just about to start Return of the King. But many of them we're starting to watch the Rings of Power, and Jacob's here, so yay. And so hopefully some of them showed up today. If not, I'm really.
You'll set it as homework, if not.
Yes, I'll set this as homework so that they can use this before they do. We're spending a whole week on the appendices, so it should be an interesting week.
Fantastic. And Jacob, would you like to say, sorry to bounce you into this, but you'd like to briefly say what your expertise on Tolkien is?
Right. Yeah. So enthusiast, scholar of Tolkien, presented at a number of different conferences, academically, creatively. I'm involved with some Tolkien-related games in my profession. So right now I'm currently a narrative designer and project manager for games at Ravensburger, North America. So we got both ends of the kind of the game end, the kind of like more creative end of things, as well as the academic end of things. So I kind of walk between two worlds there.
Brilliant. And my name is Julia Golding. I'm an author, Tolkien enthusiast, and I run the Oxford Centre for Fantasy. And we've been looking forward to the Rings of Power because we always enjoy seeing new expressions of creativity coming forward. But this is very much meant to be a session where you can put in your views and get your views out there. So we've discovered that the Q&A tab works. So do put your thoughts in there as we go along. But the first part of this is going to be just like an overview. So you clock whether or not you agree with our views as we go along. And we'll do that for 20 minutes to 30 minutes. And then the rest of it will be for you to ask questions or give your views on what they have done over Amazon Prime. So just to say, first of all, at the Oxford Centre for Fantasy, our approach isn't to say they didn't do this and this isn't in Tolkien. That's not how we're going. I'm sure you've had a chance to read the experts on that. We're looking at it more as, the question is, looking at it as creatives. How did they do? Seeing that they're not, they've got their own set of rules they're following. How did they do within that rules? But we will very quickly just, for those of you who are interested in what the gap is between what Tolkien sketched out for the Second Age and what they actually did, we're just going to give the headlines of where the differences were, just to see what choices they made as creatives. So Paula, why don't you start on timeline? And Jacob, I'll ask you about characters. So Paula, you first of all hit off on timeline.
Timeline's all off. The timeline of the Second Age is much longer, and they've condensed it so much that I think in some ways they've, by putting people who are 1,000 years down the line in the middle of the story, such as Isildur, you kind of lose the sense of the drama that it took for all of these different forces to come together to oppose Sauron. And again, you've got, it truncates the impact in some ways as to how everything is moving forward. And you know, they're going to put it over 5 seasons, but it's kind of like making 3 movies out of The Hobbit. You stretch where you shouldn't necessarily stretch, and you shrink where it might have been better if things had gone on a little more.
So just to give some dates on that, if you look at the dates, you've got the making of the rings is the equivalent of the 1500s. So looking at English history, that's the time of Henry VIII and the Tudors, and the time of the fall of Numenor and those characters at the end, the last generation in Numenor, is in the 3000s. So that's like Star Trek centuries.
Yeah,
that's how I've been telling it myself.
No, and I think that's a good description of it. So you're missing 2000 years of some very significant events.
But the reason they've done that is obvious.
Yes.
Which is you can't make a program which have the human drama and the elf drama separated by 2000 years. So they've done the job of moving it like that, and that's a choice which they can be criticized for, but you can see.
Oh, I can see it. I just
why they chose it. Yeah. Okay. Over to you, Jacob, for characters. Which characters are kind of Tolkien-esque and which ones are freestyling?
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, like the issue of a creative adaptation, right? Every adaptation is a translation and interpretation, so it's never going to be perfect, right? Between any two, or else it would be the thing itself. So it's broken. We recognize that it's different, and I really like the approach of the Oxford Center for Fantasy, which is looking at this as a creative whole, right? But what they're doing with this, kind of inspired by. So I think, yeah, going along with what's already been mentioned by Paula with the timeline. So you have with the Durins, right? So Durin 3 and Durin 4, you don't have, according to Tolkien, right, you don't have 2 Durins that are happening in the same place, because there's this idea that possibly it's the same Durin that's kind of being perhaps reincarnated or coming back, or this legend perhaps. So you never have 2 Durins at the same time. And so putting those 2 together is, departs wildly from Tolkien. I understand from a creative aspect the sort of drama that creates, that's kind of necessary for raising stakes and tension. So that's one of the I think big ones that you can see pretty easily. One of them that I just love Finrod as a character so much, and to see Finrod just kind of relegated to a background character and just used as Galadriel's motivation, right? So Finrod, brother of Galadriel, and all Finrod's entire story, right, kind of really responsible for building initial relationships between humans and elves, and then the incredible arc that he has in the story that he has with his own death, this incredibly heroic death in the Silmarillion. Of course, they don't have the showrunners, and the show itself doesn't have access to, they can't use those stories in the Silmarillion, so they're kind of, it seems like here's what you have available, is what's inside the Lord of the Rings and the appendices in terms of what's in the middle age, the second age. And so what can you tease out from those sources and have to go with those while trying to sneak in some of the Silmarillion stuff, but for legal reasons they can't. So it's this really strange, tricky adaptation that's not really able to adapt all of Tolkien's work as a whole, but just take kind of like bits and pieces. So I understand the difference that they have there. They can't pull in all of that information about Finrod, but just as somebody who really likes Finrod as a character in the bigger narrative that
Finrod fanboy. Yeah. So
exactly.
I think just to outline who's Tolkien, only very briefly. So Galadriel is clearly Tolkien, but is given a role which isn't mentioned by Tolkien, shall we say. The Elrond, obviously we know is there. Celebrimbor and Gil-galad, they're all in Tolkien, but then we start moving over to invented characters. So Nori, Brandyfoot, that's an invention. though the Harfoots are mentioned as the proto-hobbits. The Arondir and Bronwyn are inventions in order to show the Southlands, and Muriel, who is the queen of Numenor, possibly may morph into her version of her that is in the Silmarillion, but at the moment she is much more of a Boadicea fighting queen aspect than is in Tolkien. So the name exists, but the character is different. So anyway, as I said, we aren't here to do the purist thing of saying, you know, because that's not what that's not the choices they were making. They were looking at this saying, here's Tolkien's material, what kind of story can we tell? So we're going to look at this first of all from the script. We're going to look at the overall story arc. So if you haven't seen the last episode, you might want to la at the first bit of this conversation. Then we're going to have a look at some favorite episodes. Then we're going to turn to look at performances. Then we're going to look at world creation. And then at the end, we'll give a grand verdict, i.e. mark out of 5. And then we'll go over to you and we'll pick up some of your comments and read them out and encourage you to discuss in the chat. Okay, which is actually the Q&A apparently. Sorry, we're using this Zoom events thing for the first time, so it's having a few teething troubles, which I apologize for. Okay, first of all, let's briefly try and keep comments fairly brief so we have time to go around. What did you think of the overall story arc, Paula?
I did not find it objectionable.
Okay,
I did find some aspects to it that were. I did. That's the other thing I teach. I did find some aspects of it to be a little off-putting, primarily because of the way I've read Tolkien all of my life. That especially when we get to the proto-hobbits. While the Harfoots are an interesting group of people and they are, you know, the performances are nice and Noria is adorable, but my only thing was that the hobbits have been sheltered for all of these centuries, and it was Bilbo who came out to, you know, start the adventures, and now suddenly thousands of years earlier, the hobbits are suddenly very proactive in assisting the stranger. And I thought that was a little odd. The 3 Norns, the anti-Norns or whatever they are, were a little, that bothered me for some reason.
Okay, so
couldn't take it.
Wasn't completely adverse, but there were elements which kind of rubbed you up the wrong way. Yeah. Okay, right. Jacob, how about you?
I think from a narrative standpoint, it was a pretty straightforward arcs they had for each of the characters, right? They clearly had several different groups that they were following, and then, you know, tracking them. I thought, you know, character arcs were decent, pretty easy to follow. There was kind of, it seemed to be a pretty long setup though. I didn't find myself like really, you know, there's continually kind of rising tension, but that really didn't come in. I didn't find myself really kind of finding myself really caught up in the story until about episode 5 or so. Was when I really started caring, I think. So I think the setup and wind up was a little bit long. I see kind of what they kind of had to do, but just kind of from a normal, you know, typical narrative standpoint. Slow in the beginning, a little hard to get into, a little long getting into kind of act 2. But I thought it came full circle. They did a good job, you know, thematically bringing it back full circle. So kind of as a story, as a single season, telling a single story with the creative decisions that they made, but just taking those different arcs, different tensions, different questions. I thought they did a good job. I was able to follow it and thought it was a good, straightforward story.
And remember, everybody, we're talking about this not as imagining Tolkien doing it as the choices made by these screen people. Okay, so here's my view. This is where I'm sort of feel I've got the strongest, you know, aside from the sort of Tolkien knowledge, this is where I feel that is my area, is writing that script. I felt what we've got here, I'm going to use the metaphor of tapestry threads. We have the single threads of the storylines, and we have Galadriel, we have Elrond, and Galadriel and Elrond touch, and Elrond and the dwarves touch. Then we've got Bronwyn and Arondir. We've got the hobbits, and we've got the people down in Númenor and Halbrand. The odd thing is that it wasn't woven together very well. So one of those threads, the Hobbit thread, just kind of floated on its own, and you could have done some very clever things where you saw them in relation to the other characters. I didn't understand why they didn't bring it together. So they did bring some of the threads together, but they would just drop them. So the last episode, there was no Bronwyn and Arondir, and there was no what happened to Isildur, and there was no dwarves. So it kind of, for me, the knitting together was where it fell apart as a story arc. And I was actually thinking, you know what, they could have looked at Lord of the Rings and thought, how do you do multiple story threads? Well, you know what, you start with one thread and then you split it, you connect them and then split them.
Right.
I was expecting them to bring them all into a beautiful sort of pattern at the end, and they kind of didn't. So for me, where I think they could have spent a bit more money in this very expensive production is actually really working through how to tell a story, because I think they made some basic rookie errors on the sort of managing of multiple story threads. And I think what Jacob was talking about, the difficulty of caring, is to do with the fact that they started with this ambitious canvas and didn't quite weave it together. So that's what I felt. Okay, so let's look at it episode by episode. There were some good bits. We have a phrase here, curate's egg. It's an old-fashioned phrase, but it means good in parts. So I've got lots of things I would, you know, say, yay, that was fun to watch. But let's start with you, Jacob, this time. Which of the episodes worked for you? Or sequence within an episode?
Really, I think the relationship between Elrond and Durin, when that came up, that's when I found myself kind of most interested and invested, right? I thought they did a good job of spending time with them. It was odd, right? Anytime we saw the elves, right, in Linden, it's almost like a ghost town, right? You see like a few people, there's not a sense that there's really much, you know, of a culture there, or maybe it's a holiday, I don't know exactly. But so like you saw some of that more, I think, in with the dwarves, right, in Moria. And so, they could have just like, you know, focused on the big, everything that's happening. I think they did that a little bit more in Númenor, where there's a sense of, you know, population. But I really like them kind of focusing in spite of not having as many background characters for that role. I thought that was a storyline that I found myself like with Disa, right, Durin's wife, weaving in there. That was fantastic. So I think of all the relationships, that was the one that I found myself most invested in the narrative.
I agree. I found Disa and Durin probably the most compelling of all of them. Yeah. And I loved her. The actress was brilliant. She was so terrific. And I mean, in what is it, episode 7, when she's talking to him after his father has completely shot him down, and her fire and her passion just strengthens him. And it just was probably one of the best scenes that I saw in the entire thing, is the scenes and her relationship to Elrond. I get off the table. Sorry. I found her compelling. I loved her. I thought she was one of the best created characters. I know we never saw dwarf women in Tolkien, but at least they did the right thing with Disa.
Yeah. So I agree with you completely, Jacob, about the emptiness of Lyndon. And somebody pointed out, actually, one of the if Nancy's here on the chat, Nancy, who's one of our students from the Oxford Centre for Fantasy, she said, did you notice that there were no women, no faces of women? The elves were attended by these ladies with veils over their faces. It was very odd, because elven women are, you know,
Elven women,
powerful people. So that was a bit strange. Anyway, I think that for me, some of the sort of momentum did get going in 6 and 7, in terms of like episodes. They felt quite, you know, crunchy episodes with things happening. What I found strange was the timing of things, though, because the big battle with Bronwyn and Arondir and what have you, which ended episode 7, meant that the events of episode 8, the making of the 3 rings, kind of, and the twist about who is Sauron, kind of happened really quickly, and it did feel a bit dislocated. Though I liked the who's Sauron storyline, but I kind of felt that could have actually run for a little bit longer to us really start asking the question more clearly. But I like that, and the way it wasn't there were some clues along the way which weren't too obvious. So when there was the revelation as to who he was, please la 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 if you haven't watched it, you know, when Halbrand turns out to be Sauron, that's good, because I've been saying to my family, hang on a minute, there was no King of the South. Who is he? You know, what's that character? So I like the fact that it wasn't completely obvious that it was going to be him, though well done if you're one of the people on the one of our attendees who saw that from the start. I didn't.
when we were watching it, when he leaves the other people on the other raft to their fate alone, my cousin who was watching it with me said, "There's your bad guy."
Okay, well done, your cousin.
Yeah,
So,
I know. I was like, really? And then after he said that, I just kept watching, and I started ticking off things like, he did this, he did that.
he makes things in metal.
Yes, he makes things in metal, and he understands alloys. And
Yeah.
it just kept building up and building up. And I thought they did a nice bit of misdirection with the anti-Norns or whatever those 3 women were called.
Yes, I
And-
didn't get how they fit in the world. Did you? Experts, where do those 3 androgynous women-y people who turn into moths, where do they fit in the world of Tolkien? Who are they? Is this a
Yeah, that's we really don't know, right? So you do find out, right, that he's that the stranger is an Istari, right? So he's one of the wizards,
Right.
and so question is it they obviously they're making all sorts of allusions visually to Gandalf, right? But it's not a certainty, right, that it is actually Gandalf, because you have a couple of blue wizards that Tolkien mentions that were out in the east. Possibilities that you have there is that those 2, because Tolkien goes back and forth kind of on exactly who those are, what they were doing. There's the possibility, I think one of his trajectories was they were, you know, like Saruman became kind of obsessed with accumulating power and ended up, you know, on the side of, at least morally, kind of larger on the side of kind of like of Sauron. And Saruman probably is a bit closer parallel, but he also had another trajectory, was that they were trying to fight the good fight and preventing Sauron from amassing an even larger army there in the east. So what you could have them doing, if they are following the two blue wizards, the stranger could be one of the blue wizards that is kind of maintaining a positive moral compass right there, who can go either way. There's that kind of obsession about like, am I good? Am I peril? He's kind of trying to figure that out. And these others, the three individuals who are in white that are tracking him, they say, you know, he's not Sauron, he's the other. You could either imply that they were looking for Sauron or this other guy, but there could also be the second blue wizard that had arrived earlier, and he had already been, you know, power hungry and corrupted, and that he had kind of amassed a base of cultists or whatever that are following him, that he's trained in wizardly ways. I don't know. There's nothing that's like that. Those characters are visually, it was fantastic. Like that fight towards the end, like when they're kind of disembodied, was quite striking. Love that imagery. But yeah, and in terms of like what's there, really don't have anything that comes to my mind of where they tie into the larger universe that Tolkien created.
Well, yeah, somebody in the chat said they thought he was Gandalf. I mean, it's still, you know, that's a possibility. It could be. Yeah, it could be indeed. Yeah, I love the conversations going on in the chat. So do keep on there, and we will come to these in a minute. So just quickly, us three, for what it's worth, we're going to look at performances. So what did you think of the main actors in the series? So we have to start with Morfydd Clark, who is our Galadriel. What did you think? Let's start with Paula. She was the one who really held it together, I think.
Yeah, she really did. I mean, she's the only linchpin that's really going to start showing up in all of these, because you at least get her in two or three different settings. And her passion is palpable, and I think she really handles that, and her concept of the fighting and who Galadriel is, and her relationship to her brother, because Galadriel does leave and follow Finrod when everybody moved. And
she had another two brothers as well who they've been cut from the picture.
Yeah, they cut them. And I like the fact that in the last episode she finally mentions Celeborn.
Oh yeah, he's missing. My husband.
Where has he's been missing for I don't know how long, but you know, I'm still married. And I thought that really they could have, again, I think if they'd gone 9 episodes seriously and just stretched out 8 into 9 and tied together some of those arcs a little more fully, you know, hi, we made the rings, okay, bye.
I was very tempted to start where's Wally, where's Celeborn meme. So if anyone's out there got the thing, you know, is he on a beach, or is he, you know, in a boat somewhere swimming to the Undying Lands?
He's been for 1,000 years, you know. Yeah, he's been gone.
So Jacob, what did you think of Morfydd Clark as Galadriel?
I never really, the point where I got like some sort of connection with her as a character, as an actor, was really when she was talking with Halbrand, and she's trying to convince him, right, that you need to lead this charge. The Queen of Numenor's, or Queen Regent of Numenor, will only do this if you are part of this. It will only go to help you. When he's saying, you know, like, what are you doing? Why is this such a big deal for you? And she says, like, why do you fight? She says, because I can't stop. So that was like the most, like the glimmer, I think the most that I saw like a real personality. She has a tall order, right? So you have Cate Blanchett, whose shadow you can't get out of, right? And so that's where everybody's mind is taking her. And so she has to kind of make this her own while also staying within certain lanes, I guess, of like what that character is. So and this is tough, right? So for this sort of season where everything, we're compressing time, and elves whose lifespans, you know, are spanning millennia, right? So that what does a character arc look like for an elf, and what does that look like in a season of television, right? So these are like inevitable tensions that you have in portraying different characters. So, but with that, even that being said, you have with the elves in general, something with the performance of elves, it was really kind of a mixed bag, right? So the elf who I felt kind of embodied more of like what I figured an elvish essence to be was Arendir. Then I thought he might have portrayed that a little bit better than Galadriel, and certainly more than like Gil-galad or Celeborn. And some of those just like didn't come off they didn't come off as elvish kind of in their air. And so they're in a really tricky place. They're in a really tricky place having to depict story, character arc, drama, while also differentiating themselves from humans. But then what does it mean to look like and be like and act like an elf in comparison? It's really sticky. So I thought she was okay. I didn't find anything like incredibly compelling about her as a character. I wasn't always like hanging on what she was doing when she was on screen.
The only time I really thought.
So please do put into the Q&A, everybody, what you thought of Galadriel as a performance. If you thought that she did a good job or not. My view is that she did a great job with the script she was given. They were lacking on, there were some things which didn't help her. So she had a bit of a one note type script, this driven thing. It wasn't that much humor. And the few times she was given a bit more range in her scenes, I thought she did really well. I also thought that there was some really dashed good choreography for her fighting that she did. She did look like the only elf who could fight. I mean, the first introductory one where they're fighting some snow troll, all the others stood around and watched while she kind of did all the heavy lifting. But anyway, it was good. So I thought, physically she was doing very well with what she was given, which I think is quite tough. My problems with the Galadriel character all to do with she is one of the oldest people there, and they made her junior to people she's not junior to, and that got on my goat, because why do we have to put this woman, female elf, as this naughty soldier who's going beyond her remit? She's much more queenly. I felt they could, anyway, that annoyed me, but maybe
I found her relationship with the Greek kid Theo, because it's a Greek name, not anything close to Scandinavian, or Welsh. I found her relationship, and when she's fighting with him, I thought she actually, and she's talking about the loss, and she's talking about, how he has to be a soldier, and she does it. I thought that was probably one of her most compelling moments, in that she's imparting this wisdom to this 14-year-old, and she gets him to rise to the occasion, because when they leave, he's holding that sword and he's her soldier, and you just get the feeling that he's always going to be her soldier.
Yeah, so those moments I think were quite late in the season.
Yeah, again.
So just going to what people are saying here, I've got Joanna says she found Galadriel flat. I think that's what Jacob was saying. Deborah wants to do the Celeborn meme. Please do. And she didn't get the emphasis on Galadriel. Yeah, I mean, these are choices, aren't they? I think they needed a strong female character, and she was there. Nancy, who is, I think that's my wonderful Nancy from who's very knowledgeable about Tolkien. She said she thinks the acting was good, but the writers made her nothing but angry all the time. So there was little nuance. Yeah, that was my problem too. Another flat. Actress great, says Maria, but the material subpar. You thought seriously silly choreography. Nah, I kind of enjoyed it, but anyway. Zoom user, Kate Blanchett has your heart. Another Anon. So that's a good point. They've said that they're interested in the long term, how she will evolve into the character we see in Lord of the Rings. Elizabeth, another of our students. Hi, Elizabeth. she liked Galadriel's power and imperfections. The elves are telling in the imperfections, and she swam away. And Andrew, hello down under. Andrew is just an amazing guy. He always gets up for these things. I hope it's not too early for you. He's in Australia. He thinks Galadriel was done well, given that they don't know much about the Second Age. Yeah, she spends most of her time. She is with Celeborn. Sorry, Celeborn, you are there actually. And she is involved in the Celebrimbor in one version of it. She is around, but she isn't notably out with her sword drawn. So anyway, as Andrew says, it's plausible she could have been a fighter. Yeah. Okay. Right. We don't want to spend too long on doing this. So I'll allow you both to pick one other character to talk about, and then we'll ask our attendees to pick their faves, and we'll give them a shout out. So Jacob, going to you. If you pick one character that you thought, yay, that's a good character, who did you like in terms of performance now? Performance.
Yeah, already mentioned Durin and Disa, so I still hold aside from there. I think, and what I think with tying into the Galadriel conversation here is that Arondir you can tell he had this internal conflict, right? And I think that's what made him more compelling, was this tension between kind of these two cultures, right, and competing responsibilities. And so I think that allowed for his character to be more interesting in a number of ways. So yeah, again, with the Galadriel, that kind of a one note, it was just this drive, revenge, and that there wasn't, I don't know what the inner tension necessarily was there. So I liked Arondir in terms of the elves, probably the best elf character. Stranger was a really interesting character. So that was one. He intrigued me as an actor, right? So his range, you couldn't quite tell. You know, he was good. He got angry. And so just the range that he was able to portray there, the sweetness, the kindness, as well as the rage. And so I thought that was really interesting from an acting perspective there. Okay, Paula, who's your pick? Your desert island pick.
I'm sorry, I just gave me a vision there. I was intrigued by the young man who played Elrond. I mean, he has big shoes to fill also. He has Hugo Weaving. He has to develop into Hugo Weaving. But I thought it was a very interesting start with him. One of the things I thought they could have talked a little more about was his brother, you know, the twin who chose to be human, and how he reacted to that. I mean, his twin brother goes off and dies, and he's this immortal. And he's working for Gil-galad, who kind of confused me because there is no real high king over the elves. Each one has their own bailiwick. And suddenly Gil-galad is in charge of all of the elves and, you know, can exile people to Valinor. That was a little confusing. And Elrond buying into that initially was confusing, but his relationship with the dwarves, I thought, that really set him apart. That really set that actor. Even just the time frame when he talks about, well, it's only been 20 years.
Yeah.
And that really, the performance when he did that, it gave you the sense that the elves don't, you know, our lives are a blink in their, you know, in their eyes. And
so just going to give a shout out to the actor. It's his name is Robert Aramayo, who plays Elrond. My shout out is actually a bit of an odd one. He doesn't make the headliners, though I did like Elendil, who's played by Lloyd Owen. I actually really liked the bad elf, the one who for a while you thought could have been Sauron, but actually he reminded me, is he Aaron or something like that? If anyone picked up his name.
Adar.
Sorry?
Adar, A-D-A-R.
Adar, thank you. But but he doesn't appear on the head cast of IMDb. But what I really liked about him is he had a motive, and he had seeing it from the bad guy's side. Because actually, when you think about what happens to orcs, you could say, well, it's kind of genocide, you know, when you go and killing orcs. And it reminded me of those books that you get, which are from the point of view of the orcs, you know, the alternative fantasy sins. So I actually thought that was a really interesting character, though he kind of, I hope he comes back. I liked his perspective because it kind of humanized, orcized the other side. And he looked he was the best of the male elves, I thought, oddly. Because I think the lovely actors who played Gil Galad and Celebrimbor, just a tad they're a bit earthly, and they're wonderful character actors. But I thought they just felt a bit anyway. Please put in the Q&A who your fave character is, and if it's different from what we've said, we'll give a shout out to those. Right, so we're just going to quickly touch on world creation, that thing, and then we're going to give our verdict out of 5, and we'll look at some of the comments in the chat. So I will be reading through and reading out some of your wonderful observations, but don't forget to put in who you thought was your favorite. Oh, Karen, she's there with, or you're just telling me what the name is. And Maria agrees with me about Adar. There, Maria, you and I, hive mind there. Okay, so let's think about the sort of production side of it. I noticed already in the question and answers, Andrew had said he enjoyed the film score, which is obviously a big part of the creation of the world. Paula, what did you think about, you know, where the money went into the visuals and the sound and the rest of it?
Didn't go into the script writing, but it did go in. I thought the battle scenes were well done. I thought the volcano aspect and watching all of that was well done. Numenor looked almost like I thought it was going to look. But the Elven Kingdoms didn't.
I think Numenor was quite a nice thing to see, that they actually bothered to build something that could have been like ancient Rome. It felt as though it was big enough to be a city.
Right. But the Elf Kingdoms just kind of, I felt they could have done more with it. If nothing else, as you said, populate them a little more. Have some people walking around without little veils on. And, you know, they could have done a lot more with that. But again, I think with the production values, this first season, I think is going to be their testing ground. They're going to see how the responses are, and they're going to see what worked and what didn't, is the way if I were producing this. And I agree. I think the tapestry analogy was very good, because they do need to tie those threads together. But their world building, the ocean was nice. There was not much they could do. The ships were good. They captured some of it. I think they could have captured more.
Okay, so Jacob,
what they're spending.
Jacob, what do you want to pick out about that?
Yeah, costumes were insane. Well, sorry, we're just unbelievable.
In a good way or a bad
way?
way?
In a good way. Okay. Yeah. just the care, the attention to detail on all the costuming was just was remarkable. That stood out to me. Yeah, just the cinematography as well, right? Some of the most gorgeous shots imaginable there. And the soundtrack, Bear McCreary has already been one of my favorite composers, kind of contemporary composers, and so I thought he did a really good job. So I've been enjoying listening to that in the background as I've been working on other things for the past.
So yes, sorry, I gave too much credit to Howard Shore. He just did the theme, didn't he?
Just the theme.
Yeah. So it was Barry McCreary who did the base, everything else. Yeah.
So in terms of like the non-script, right? The all that the set design, the production design, costumes, music, everything else, just absolutely top notch for me. That was nothing drew my attention away from there at all. It just, in some senses, it heightened what was there on the page.
I have some costume niggles. Am I allowed a couple of costume
Please do.
niggles? So I worried about Bronwyn with her bare shoulders. It looked pretty cold where she was. Everybody else was wrapped up, but she had this silhouette which was all kind of exposed. And I thought, put a scarf on, love, is what I thought. And that got to me because she was set aside from the others. And then I got a bit worried about the Harfords because I think they were trying to give them trying to make them feel shorter, but they all were wearing so much stuff, like great big clumpy skirts. And the hobbits in the Shire have managed to understand that, little 3/4 length trousers are the way to go. So I found they just were really loaded down. These are nomadic people, but they're carrying like loads of material, and then they put all their grass and stuff on top of that. So that really annoyed me. I did like Muriel's armor. I thought Arondir's armor was interesting with the green man look on it, but it didn't look very elven. It looked like it kind of been sawn by, it looked a bit rough. I don't know. He could have done him a bit more polish. I suppose they were trying to differentiate him from the kind of Galadriel elves. I suppose Galadriel had a wonderful set of clothes, though I did feel sorry for her having to spend the first couple of episodes wearing this semi-transparent shift thing. It's kind of, anyway. So I had a few quibbles with the costume department, but anyway, I don't know if anyone else on the chat wants to join with me in that. If you all love it, I'll shut up. But just going back to the chat and to our earlier discussion about performances, I want to mention a new one that's been shouted out, which of Megan Richard as Poppy Proudfellow. That's quite a tongue twister. Was admired. And who else?
And Sadok Burrows was somebody else that somebody mentioned there in the chat that did a great job. Lenny Henry, the leader of the Harfoots.
Oh yes,
yeah, he was
Lenny Henry, who's a very well-known actor here and comedian over here. So did you know him in America at all? Okay. Well, you see, this is the odd thing. It's like seeing I'm trying to think who would be a really famous comedian for you. I mean, he's like super famous. And seeing, so you had to really kind of divorce him from his profile. He does all like the charity shows when they're doing public performances, and yeah. So I'm glad that you liked him. He's one of our national treasures. And yes, there's another shout out for cinematography, Numenor, and so on. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so Karen's saying that people on Amazon don't like criticism. Well, tough, we're criticizing you. Hopefully, hopefully they will listen to feedback, and next season they will go for a better story. Yeah, Diana is saying, what is that with putting stuff in the Harfoot's hair? It was supposed to be disguise, wasn't it? A mixture of disguise and culture.
Yeah, they were supposed to blend with the bushes and the grasses and everything as they were going along, which you kind of lost that along the way. Okay, so before we go over to everybody else, what is your grand verdict? And perhaps you could say a little bit why you've given it that that mark. What is it that made you decide on that rating out of 5? So everybody else listening, we're going to be looking at an out of 5 rating. Paula, how about you? 3.75.
And why, what's lost the 1.25?
Scripting.
Okay.
The scripts really, the one note Galadriel, the lack of cohesion with the different story arcs that were going along, the lack of female elves, and a lack of background characters as well. I mean, the thing that's always gotten to me about Lord of the Rings, about anything, is you always had these other people there. Whether it's Bree, whether it's whatever, you have interactions, and then, but you only have these little interactions, these tiny little groups, and they need to all, you're fighting one great evil.
Yeah.
It's, you need everyone together.
How about you, Jacob?
I had the exact same score as Paula written down beforehand,
strange,
3.75.
strange.
So think like, yeah, it was good. It wasn't, I wasn't entirely comfortable. If you were, so Julia, if you were going to force us into just like a whole star.
No, 3.75 is fine.
Okay, that's okay. I was going to round up to 4 just because I'm generally a more generous critic of other people's art, just because it was a big swing that they took. It was tremendous, right? So it could have gone much worse.
Exactly.
Could have, yeah. So I think, and I agree with pretty much everything that Paula said, for the reasons about why I couldn't comfortably give it like a 4+ rating. Was just, my investment, especially for the first half of the season, was purely based on, I like Tolkien. I'm desperate to see Tolkien's world, more of it as much as possible, right? So that's what really kept me going. And then, so I think the character, some of the characterization, especially if you're building this whole thing around Galadriel, really, I didn't find myself really compelled by her character and what she was doing. And so, yeah, that's my reasoning. So great. So I thought I did a great job. Almost 4 stars. Glad that they did it. Really grateful that they did it, and all those people. It takes so many people to put a production like that together. So just in amazement and filled with gratitude for all the people that dedicated so much time and effort and energy into making a production like that. Is phenomenal.
So do start putting your scores in the chat. Some in the question and answers. Some of you already are. I'm a bit meaner. I think it's a 3. When I first started watching it, I was more around a 4, and that was in recognition of the visual feast. I got to be about a 3 on it, and I'll tell you why. It's the story point, but it was also, I was so annoyed by some of the logical stupidities in it. So things like Galadriel jumping out of the boat and swimming back. I was just saying, where do you think you're going? You know, I just felt that was, and the other bit that really annoyed me is some of the what I would call horse riding kind of overplay. Like they had long, like, I'm really enjoying horse riding. I didn't kind of get those moments. And then the other logical flaw, which was Numenor sets off to save this place with 3 boats. Okay, yeah, it's hardly like the most great flotilla, armada coming. They get there and they manage to find their way directly to this obscure village. And then you see them charging on horses again, charging along with horses, and they arrive just at the right time. I didn't get the connection between that village, where they landed, and how they found each other, how they even knew anything was going on, particularly because it turns out the guy who says my people in the south, or sort of, is, you know, playing for the other side, in the not, you know, in the sense of, yeah, he turns out to be the bad guy.
Bad.
So I was actually shouting at the TV, not shouting, I'm not quite that bad. I was telling my husband whilst we were watching it that I thought some of those things were silly. And I also, my other logical hate point was Mithril. I know, why have this? We need Mithril in order to make us defend us against the light, the decline of the elves, as if they all need to be covered in mithril armor. The logic on that really worried me, and I'm glad they went for rings in the end, because that's, you know, but that just so it went from a 4 to a 3, but I enjoyed it because it's sometimes fun to watch something you don't agree with and tell your husband everything that's wrong with it. And
That's
he
what I
says,
was
"Be
doing to my
quiet,
cousin.
I'm trying to watch it."
I'm
So
doing the same thing.
I'm going to have a quick look at what you all think. So Karen's given us a breakdown. Was it Tolkien? 1. Story 2. Look of Male Elves. 1. Locations 4. Fantasy shown is 3. So she's somewhere. You're about a 2.5 or something, if my maths is right. Joanna says 2. Val, hi Val, who I also know. Oh, Val is a fan. I'm really pleased that you're a fan, because this is not so we all agree. Val thought it was 4.5, little flat in parts. Zoom user, oh, not pleased. 1 to 2 stars. Like me, he or she is worrying about the no sense aspect. Yeah. And AC, yeah, the rhythm aspect of that is fun. So Arcana, cinematography 5.5 out of 5, storyline 2 out of 5, costumes 4. People are separating this out, which I can understand.
Yeah.
Damnation, hopefully that's a username. 2.5 out of 5. Yeah, you're sort of more in my area. Joanna agrees with me on the mithril. Oh yeah, Joy's also worried about the horses and the boats. Yeah, I was just really, I get kind of hooked on these things when I see something that doesn't follow logically and it just gets to me. So 2.5, Elizabeth, 5 for the hype. Yes, their marketing department did really well.
Very well.
You liked our discussion, thank you. 4 for the art, 4 for the mystery. Oh, 4 for the acting. So she's generally a happy camper. So that's nice. There is just, before we're going to wrap up shortly, but there's an interesting question here, which is looking at what happens next. And that perhaps would be a nice place to wrap up. Arcana is saying, given what we know about the direction of the story in the Silmarillion, though we know they don't necessarily stick to that, with respect to Ar-Pharazôn and Miriel, do you think they will stay true to that or go in a different direction? And her comment is, it's hard to tell right now. For those of you who are not deep in Silmarillion lore, the little we know about Ar-Pharazôn, who is the advisor with the black and white beard, the badgery one, that guy, and Miriel. In the book, Miriel is indeed supposed to be queen, but she's usurped by Ar-Pharazôn, who marries her, force marriages her. And the impression I always got was that she was a sort of a younger, more vulnerable character than the one that we've seen, the Miriel we've seen. Okay, so Jacob, what did you think? Did you notice the Pharazôn character?
Yeah. And so that's, I have a hard time in just given the contemporary discourses about consent and whatnot, that they would actually choose to follow a forced marriage, right, with the strength of the character that they already established, Miriel, with, you know, her independence. I mean, yeah, so I can see him perhaps, you know, somehow taking over, making an argument for the people. You know, nobody kneels in Numenor, so it seems like they're kind of trying to establish a more kind of democratic society or something where people are more equal than not, except they still have a king, but inactive king. And so having him make a play for the leader of the people. So I think, so I see some kind of political kind of themes that are there going on in Numenor that could play out, and that Miriel could be, and obviously, right, that we saw in the final episode that kind of injecting more the idea of the faithful too, right? The Valar and Iluvatar. There's these people who are want to be true to their heritage, a kind of spiritual heritage versus and connection with the elves versus those who are not. And so I think that's going to play that there's going to be more conflict between the two. So I have a hard time seeing Pharazôn forcefully marrying Muriel and continuing that line. I think there'll probably be a lot more tension, maybe between two kind of systems of governance in Numenor is kind of what I would guess, but I don't have a Palantir, so I can't say for sure.
Yeah, that's the other, sorry, another of my shouting at television. So Isildur's sister looks in the Palantir and we never find out what happens. Sorry, that was, sorry, I'm just having a little bit.
Yeah, well, and where's his
this is therapy for me, because I need to shout at something.
and
Paula,
where's his brother? Where's Isildur's brother?
He's on the west. He's on the west. He's in the west of Numenor, where the faithful are. So
Apparently, but
two,
I mean,
like more battling between those holdouts. It's
yeah,
coming.
I think the one thing that might play into the forced marriage is that if I recall historically, blind, disabled people could not hold the crown themselves, and that might be our Pharazôn's method of either saying, you either marry me or I'm just usurping you, and
So
that might be the choice that she makes.
is that, I don't know that it's within Tolkien. You mean?
No, but that is in Scandinavian, and that was in several of the in several of his background mythology.
Okay. Well, that would be really
Voices.
disappointing. I mean, because wasn't it
Amazing.
the wonderful blind doge of Venice who led one of the big most successful raids of Venice during the period of the Crusades, which I suppose is not a great moment to, Crusades, but not good, but you know what I mean. It can be empowered figures in medieval times, so I would find that a bit,
That is also part of, but also part of historically, even the ancient Picts in Britain, medieval history major, even the ancient Picts could not have someone scarred or maimed in any way hold the throne. I mean, you have gods who've lost hands and stuff, and they lose their main position. So there is a mythological background to it that could justify Pharazôn's usurpation of the throne. I mean, it's an excuse. She's perfectly capable, and it's an excuse. But if you recall, in this, he's already talked to his son about, no, I want them to go. It's going to be a good thing. So he's already conniving.
I'd prefer to see her as actually a really good role model. If Amazon, if you're listening, which they won't be, I'd like to see her as a good role model, overcoming that and actually, being a good leader rather than.
And she's obviously got affection for Elendil, which could set up a nice, interesting fight between Elendil the faithful and a usurper. I mean, that could be an interesting little fight until we figure out where Isildur is. His horse knows.
So I think what we can say to that question is, it looks as though they are setting up the politics of a divided court in Numenor, how they handle Muriel's vulnerability, shall we say, at the moment, of getting used to the fact that whether or not it's permanent or not, temporary blindness or permanent, she obviously means she needs people around that she can trust, and we probably can tell that our Pharazôn is not trustworthy. So whereas Elendil is, so that might be it means that she needs to work out who to trust, and maybe she trusts the wrong one. That would be Tolkien to not trust the right one, to trust our Pharazôn, and but we must wrap up because we've gone over our time. Thank you everybody for coming along, and thank you for your lively contributions in the chat. And I think it's fair to say that even if we gave it 1 star or if we gave it 4.5, we probably all will be watching season 2. Most of us will be, I would say, just because it's so nice to see a new interpretation of Tolkien for our era. And to end on a positive note, I think it's really good to see diversity amongst elves and dwarves.
Yes.
So that was nice and well done. So well done them. Really fun to see that. And definitely the strongest part, I think, in terms of what they're leaving behind them is changing the way we visually see those, those cultures. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Jacob. And
Thank you.
that's all for now. Bye.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
They can't hear you.
Oh,
Can you?
Everyone.
yeah.
Bye now.
Bye there.